It's midsummer and Japanese beetles are everywhere, chewing up all kinds of plants. Well, in this program, I'm going to help you identify if you actually have the Japanese beetle, because a lot of people are confusing them with other pests. We're going to look at the life cycle of this pest, and then I'm going to discuss different ways to control the pest and tell you which ones actually work. Watch this video right to the end because I'm going to save you a ton of money. By using the right control methods, you won't be buying products that don't actually work. The first step is in identifying the pest. I see lots of pictures that people post on social media and then ask, how do I control the Japanese beetle? And it's pretty clear from the damage that it's not the Japanese beetle. Never try to control a pest until you're sure you know what you have. So how do you know? Well, the Japanese beetle is quite distinctive. It has this metallic sheen to it. It's kind of a bronzy green sheen. And once you've seen them, you'll be able to identify them right away. They're out during the day, and they're usually sitting on top of a leaf. And in fact, they're almost always two together having sex. They're slow moving, so they're easy to capture. And if you have them on a bush, you'll see them because there'll be lots of them. Now, the damage that they do is both to the leaves and to flowers. With leaves, they eat the juicy parts between the veins. And so when they're finished chewing on a leaf, you typically have the whole leaf, but all of the veins are still there with spaces between them. It's quite a distinctive chewing mark. On flowers, they just nibble on the ends of the petals usually. Once you know you have the problem, the next step is to understand their life cycle. Don't reach for something to spray on the bugs. Take the time to understand the life cycle. It will help you understand which of the solutions proposed in social media and online actually work. So what is the life cycle of this pest? Somewhere around midsummer, the pupate of this insect finishes its cycle and the adult emerges. It then flies around, and it can fly up to 5 miles or 8 kilometers looking for food. Now, the big problem with this pest is that it eats just about everything. It will feed on over 100 different kinds of plants. It's not really fussy, so there's almost certainly some plants in your garden it will eat. Once it finds a plant, it settles down on that plant and just starts eating away. Now, one thing you notice is that once you have one of these beetles, you typically have more. One of the reasons is that many plants actually exude some chemicals which attracts the beetle. And so you tend to find lots of beetles on one plant, and the plant right next to it might not have any. The beetles breed, and then it's ready to lay their eggs. And they do that usually on lawns or grassy areas. The eggs hatch and turn into grubs, and those grubs like to eat plant roots, but they particularly like grass roots because they're a little more tender than some of the other types of roots. The insect goes through a series of molts, and the grubs get bigger and bigger, and then they pupate, and they live underground until they're ready to hatch out next season. Once you understand that, you have a better idea how to control them. We can control the beetles themselves as they're flying around and sitting on your plants, or we can try to control them when they're grubs while they're underground. And both approaches can work. And this is why it's so important that you learn the life cycle of these pests. You not only know when to control them, but where to control them. The first control method that I'd like to discuss is soapy water. You simply make a dish with soapy water in it, and you go to the plants, and you literally scoop the beetles into the soapy water. I generally hold the soapy water under the leaf and just scrape them in. The beetles aren't moving very much, especially early in the morning. They don't tend to fly away, so you can just knock them into the water. Once they're in the water, the soap prevents them from walking on the surface of the water, and they basically fall in and drown. You can let that sit in the garden for a day or two to make sure they're dead, and then just pour it on the garden or on your compost pile. When I was collecting these in midsummer, when I had lots of them, I'd go out twice a day on a particular plant that they liked and simply scoop them in, and I'd get 100 each time. It's a simple way to collect them. It works quite well, but of course you have to go in your garden all the time to do it. Now, if you go online, lots of people suggest other things to add to that soapy water to make it more effective. Just ignore all of them. A few drops of dish soap in some water, that's all you need. Why make this complicated? The second method I'd like to discuss are the special Japanese beetle traps. They're usually very yellow. That attracts the beetle, and they climb inside, fall into some sort of a container, and they can't get out. Now, these traps are very effective at collecting the beetles. The problem is they don't work well in small gardens. Now you wonder, how can that be? Well, let me explain what happens. If you take one of these traps and put it near your plants, it attracts beetles from the whole neighborhood. Remember, they can fly 5 miles. So the beetles from all over your neighbors are being attracted to this trap, and you do collect a lot of them. However, many of the beetles that are attracted to the garden don't make it to the trap. They settle on your plants. And so what science has found is that although the trap works quite well in attracting beetles, it doesn't lower the number of beetles in your garden. To be effective, this trap needs to be at least 100 feet away from any of the plants you're trying to protect. And for most gardens, that doesn't work because they're too small. I guess the solution here is to buy these and give them to your neighbors. Let them put them up. Even if you have a larger lot, you have to be careful with this trap because once it collects a certain number of beetles, it becomes less effective. Something called the spillover effect. Once it's sort of half full of beetles, the other beetles that come along go in, but they're able to get back out again. So it's really important with these traps to continually empty them so that they're effective. For most backyards, this is really a solution that is not going to work very well. But on big yards, it can be made to work. How about neem oil? Now, neem oil is the darling of social media. Every time there's a pest discussed, someone, and usually many people, will say, neem oil, use neem oil. Well, neem oil does work for a number of pests like aphids, but it doesn't work very well for Japanese beetles. Neem oil works in one of 2 ways. It either coats the animal in oil and basically suffocates it, and with Japanese beetles that doesn't work very well because they're too large. Or neem oil can have an insecticide in it, and that can kill the insect. It turns out that Japanese beetles aren't affected very much by that insecticide either. So neem oil is actually a really bad choice, even though it's extremely popular in social media. Since I've mentioned neem oil, I want to mention something else. There are actually 2 kinds of neem oil. There's the kind that is just the oil component, and then there's a variety that has the oil component plus it has the active insecticide in it. And it turns out most people buy the wrong one, and then it's really not as effective as it could be. If you want to learn more about neem oil, hop on over to my website, gardenmyths.com, and I have an article there about neem oil, and it discusses the 2 types, and it provides information so that you buy the right one. As far as Japanese beetles go, forget the neem oil. How about organic pesticides? Things like the pyrethrins. Now, these are somewhat effective on Japanese beetles. The problem is the beetle actually has to be sprayed with the material. So you have to take the spray, go in your garden, find the beetle, and spray it. And then it might kill it. There's no point in just spraying your plants and hoping that will work. That doesn't work. So now, if you have to go out and actually find the beetle, and then you have to spray the beetle, isn't it easier just to use the soapy water? I mean, it's less expensive. There's no insecticide involved at all. And if you have to go in the garden and find these beetles and do something to them anyways, I think that's an easier solution. So some of these natural organic insecticides do work, but I think they're too much work. None of them can simply be sprayed on your plants and protect them. Another way to protect your plants is with trap crop. Now, this won't get rid of the beetles, but it does keep them off your prized plants. And the idea here is that you plant something that the beetles like better than your prized perennial. And they go on this trap crop and sit there. Now, you could use this with the soapy water dish to collect them, and then you actually get rid of the beetles. Or you can just plant these trap crops in your garden somewhere, keep the beetles off of the plants you really care about. Japanese beetles feed on over 300 different plant species, but they do prefer certain types of plants, things like evening primrose, the zinnia, borage, and the grape. Where most of them are found in my garden right now is on the persicaria, the mountain fleece flower. If you plant any of these in your garden, you'll keep the beetles in one spot in your garden. And right now, almost every Japanese beetle in my garden is either on the grapes, which grow wild at the back of my property, or they're on the mountain fleece flower. And quite honestly, the rest of the garden's pretty empty of Japanese beetles because of those trap crops. So far in this program, we've talked about ways of controlling the actual beetle, but there's a completely different approach to the problem. Why don't we kill the grubs that are in our lawns before they even hatch? That should get rid of the beetle problem. And it turns out there's a very good solution for that, and that is beneficial nematodes. Now, these nematodes are tiny, tiny little microscopic worms. You apply them to the grass. The nematodes crawl around until they find one of these grubs. They burrow their way into the grub, and what they do is they actually inoculate that grub with a particular type of bacteria. That bacteria starts growing inside the grub. And when there's lots of this bacteria, the nematode actually eats the bacteria. So the nematode is living on the bacteria that it injected in the grub. As the nematode grows and it reproduces, there's more and more nematodes inside this grub, and eventually it kills the grub. These nematodes do work very well. It's important to understand that these nematodes are living creatures, and so you have to follow the instructions precisely. First of all, when you buy them, they have to be alive, so be careful where you get them from. Treat them properly. Then apply them the way it says. Usually you dilute them with water and then spray them on your lawn and then water those in because they have to get into the soil before the sun dries them out. It's also important to do that at the right time of the year. But if you follow the instructions and the nematodes are alive when you buy them, it will work quite well. But there is a catch. Let's say you go through this process and you do a really great job. You don't have any grubs in your lawn. What that means is that next summer there won't be any beetles hatching from your lawn. But what about the neighbors? If the neighbors don't use nematodes, they will be producing beetles, and those beetles will then fly into your yard. So nematodes do work, but in a typical neighborhood where most neighbors are not using nematodes, they really don't have much of an effect because the beetles in the whole neighborhood will be coming to your garden to eat your precious plants. There's one other solution that we haven't talked about, and that's a pretty simple one. There are plants that Japanese beetles prefer. I mentioned my persicaria, the mountain fleece flower. If I don't grow that in my garden, I wouldn't have as many beetles because I really like the taste of that plant. So one thing you can do is simply get rid of the plants they really like. In fact, give those plants to your neighbors and let the beetles go over there. I hope that's been helpful to you. I have a couple of videos about pests and diseases. This one up here goes through a series of common pests and diseases and gives you control methods that really do work. And a lot of the stuff you hear on the internet doesn't work. So have a look at that video. And the video down here has a look at the kinds of pests that I have in my garden, and I go through the process of how I deal with them. I also go into my philosophy of pests and diseases, and if you follow my philosophy, you will have a lot less problems in the garden because you'll change the way you think of the whole process. Happy gardening.